So, up until now, Doctor Who hasn't yet introduced its most famous Deus Ex Machina, which inspired its own fan saying of Sonic Ex Machina. Of course, I'm talking about the infamous sonic screwdriver, that is now used to ruin the endings of stories since 2005, when it was changed into a magic wand to solve any problem. But that's what it was and used for since 2005. So what was it during its first ever appearance? It screwed screws, of course. What else? Other than that, today's story is famous for being the final completely missing story, a missing story that has bonus features in existence, the departure of Victoria, and a villain that should be completely ridiculous that produces a clip that terrifies me when I first saw it out of context. So brace yourselves and let's dig into Fury from the Deep. Fury from the Deep was written by Victor Pemberton, directed by Hugh David, produced by Peter Bryant, originally broadcast on Saturdays from the 16th of March to the 20th of April, 1968, and all 6 episodes remain missing from the BBC archive. Let's begin with episode 1, where we open in the sea, where the TARDIS comes down, materializing on top of the water. The Doctor, Jamie, and Victoria rowed ashore in a raft as the TARDIS stays floating on the water. The Doctor explains that they're in England, which Victoria comments about how they always land on Earth. Jamie notices some foam, and they start messing around in it for a laugh. They go to inspect a pipeline covered in seaweed. It's a gas line that has nothing to do with the foam. The Doctor takes out his sonic screwdriver for the first time to undo some screws on a hatch, where they start hearing a beating noise. It seems to be coming from the pipe, and Victoria starts getting creeped out, so they go away. We see they're being watched and then are shot down. Victoria wakes up in a pile with 2 guards watching over them. The other 2 wake up and have difficulty moving. The Doctor tries asking the guards where they are, but get no reply as a man bursts in asking who they are. They're gas, which helps them regain mobility, and are questioned on what they're doing here. The Doctor says that they were just curious and are locked up for it. Another man, Harris, says not to lock them up because they weren't doing anything wrong, but the other guy says just to have them under guard. Harris explains to them that a rig has gone out, and so they're suspicious because of the tense Robeson shot them down. He takes them to be locked up as a warning flashes. Mrs. Harris tries getting into the facility but has trouble with security. The Doctor explains that he just felt a movement in the pipe and wanted to see what it was. He says it might be marine life from a possible fracture, suggesting they shut it off until they can get someone to check. Harris says that would be out of the question and then Robeson calls Carney at Rig D, who says they shouldn't worry because everything is under control there. As there's a ringing going on. Apparently there was some sort of accident with the emergency crew, as Carney creepily repeats that everything's under control. Harris suggests turning off the gas, which Robeson refuses to do, and as they are reported, something must be blocking it. So Harris suggests having Robeson check his reports as someone steals them out of his briefcase. Robeson tells him to get the reports so he can show Harris where he's gone wrong. The file has disappeared, and he says that he'll go home to get them. He'll be back in maybe an hour. The Doctor and Victoria lift Jamie into the vent shaft very loudly. Harris meets his wife Maggie, and he gives her a pass if she gets his files that he's missing. Jamie's lifted into the vent and falls to the other side of the door, but after making a big deal about how you can't unlock a door with a hairpin like Victoria suggested. But of course, Victoria has unlocked it with her hairpin. Maggie searches for the files and finds some seaweed in the correct one. She throws it out the window after she's stung by it, and outside it starts to glow. Robson is called by Van Lettens about contacting with Rig D, who came in afterward because of how unusual it was. But Robson says he doesn't care about what he's here for. He's just here for advice. Van Lettens explains his position that he's here for the Dutch government because of Robson's pride, which makes Robson, of course, storm off. He's contacted by the Chief Baxter at a different rig, who tells him about the pipes and the noise, and as the Doctor and Jamie have sent Victoria to the bunks as they listen in. Maggie calls her husband, who tells Robeson that they need to get her to a doctor because she's gotten sick. Since the doctor's on the rig, Robeson allows him to call the outside for one. In the oxygen store, a man starts opening the cylinders when he hears someone coming and hides. Victoria ducks in the room and goes to close the cylinders. When she turns around, she sees the man locking the door, and a vent opens. The Doctor and Jamie look around an area of control where they find the impeller and cylinders that check the gas. Victoria can't pick the lock on the door when foam starts to pour in out of the vent along with toxic gas. The Doctor and Jamie hear something in the pipes as Victoria screams in terror as they go to find her. The foam has started to fill up the room as she lets out another scream. This leads into episode 2, where the Doctor and Jamie call for Victoria and rush into the room she's in and get her out of there. Robson and Van Lutyens arrive and notice the gas. Victoria exclaims that there was a horrible creature of gas and a hissing sound, and Harris realizes that there are empty cylinders, that all the oxygen are empty, and they notice that there was toxic gas in the vents. Someone also had locked her in from the outside. Harris is taking care of his wife, who's frightened of her hands. She can't remember what happened to her and explains that inside the file there was seaweed that stung her. He has her lie down and rest as she goes into heavy breathing as foam starts bubbling outside. As they hug, and she lies down again, hopefully getting some sleep. Harris goes to try to get a doctor. She gets up and goes outside onto the patio where she screams and rushes back in. The pump isn't holding steady, and the doctor says that they heard a thumping sound, which Robson says was a mechanical fault that can make a pin sound like a thunder, or it's just a fish. Van Lutyens says they must turn down the gas, but Robson is still very stubborn. Jamie and Victoria are taken to Price, who shows them the security and the plans for the rigs connected to a central control rig. Harris asks Price if the rig's doctor has been returned. He then goes to the doctor, which Robson refuses to let him go with him for longer than an hour. Maggie gets to the door and 2 men are there. The maintenance controllers, Oak and Quill, looking for Mr. Harris to inspect the kitchen. That must be carried out without delay. She lets them in and they introduce themselves. She tells them to be quick and not to disturb her. Van Lutyens is told by the engineer that something is interfering with the impeller as it gets close to the danger point. Robson has them release some of the pressure. Maggie goes to look at herself in the mirror as outside Oak notices something on his hands, so he wears gloves, and they follow the thumping out onto the patio. They open the door and let foam start to pour in. They then go into Maggie's room when she asks what they're doing. They come closer and open their mouths to dispel a toxic gas in a scene that still exists, and God, is it scary. Maggie falls onto the floor unconscious. The pressure in the rig goes down enough as the impeller starts to slow down, and Robson says that they still need to keep going. They call Rig C to see how it's going out there on their end, but get no response. Harris, Victoria, and the doctor go into Harris's house to find it full of gas and Maggie on the floor. They break a window and attempt to get the gas out. Van Lutyens tells Robson that everything is going wrong because he saw nothing at control and they're in danger. Robson says that he's always right, and Van Lutyens says that Robson must listen for once as they go to check the impeller, which shuts off. A heartbeat then starts. The doctor realizes that Maggie's in a coma and the gas was from the same form of gas in the room that Victoria was trapped in. Harris explains that she was stung, and Victoria finds wet seaweed. Harris was the one that was meant to touch it. Jamie brings up that the seaweed was all over the pipeline, and Victoria thinks that it might have moved, that the seaweed on the ground might have moved. The chief engineer has everything checked as the sound has stopped. Van Lutyens makes him state his opinions on all this and demands a word in private. He says he knows where the problem may be, and that it send men down the shaft to free a valve. And he says they need to get permission from Robson to check. They hear the heartbeat start again. Something's alive in the pipeline, and they all listen as work starts again, listening to the waiting heartbeat. This leads into episode 3, where the doctor says Jamie can't touch the seaweed, and Victoria insists that it did move. They put it in a bag using tongs, and the doctor assures Harris that Maggie should be fine. They decide to take a look around the area before they're put into a cell again, using this a chance to get out to the TARDIS. The heartbeat stops, and Robson still thinks that it's just a mechanical fault. The doctor puts the seaweed into a tank on the TARDIS lab with natural gas to see its effect. Victoria shows him her results from a test showing that the weed is what gives off the gas. Jamie notices wiggling things in the weed under a microscope. This means that the weed is alive. Van Lutyens tries talking to Harris, who goes to Price to see if Dr. Patterson is back. He isn't, so Price sends for medical attention. Robson wants to know where the doctor is, which he's mad at Robson for allowing them to go free. He isn't mad because they're saboteurs, but he's he's told that the impeller is moving in, but then it stops. He then freaks out at Van Luttens, who says that there's something in the pipeline, and Robson demands to know when the impeller will work again. He goes to lie down. Van Luttens says that Harris must take over because Robson is now insane under these abnormal conditions. He says they should evacuate and shut down. The doctor shows Victoria a book of legends, which shows the weed from the 18th century as gas starts to fume in from the tank along with a tendril. They force the top back on after Victoria screams, and they all go get to Robson. Robson is lost at making a speech on how he's in charge, and it's all for him, and he's in charge, in that order. Van Luttens then goes to call his company to get Robson removed. Robson goes to bed as someone unlocks his door, and Robson says to go away. Mr. Oak then turns on Robson's vent control. The heartbeat starts as Robson's room is flooded with the gas. He runs out as Harris tries asking him about sending men down to the impeller shaft. The doctor, Jamie, and Victoria find the foam in the Harris's home as tendrils come out of it, and Victoria screams as it goes away. Jamie is covered in foam in the other room, and the doctor and Victoria open a skylight and help him up out of the hatch to safety and safely close the hatch, locking the foam and weed inside. Harris shows Van Luttens where he saw the weed in Robson's quarters, and they realize that they must take over to stop a crisis. Price is told to have Robson found and all the vents closed. Harris then tries calling the board in London to speak with a Miss Megan Jones. Victoria questions why they always end up in trouble and wishes that for once, never mind. Jones is set to arrive in 3 hours. Oak and Quill spy on them as the doctor comes in to explain that the creatures are living seaweed that has been blocking the impeller and that attaches itself to people, and Harris calls for his wife. They realize Robson has been attacked, and the medics say they haven't gotten to Mrs. Harris yet. Outside, Maggie tells Robson to obey as she walks into the depths of the sea, with the heartbeat beating even louder. This leads into episode 4, where Price tries calling Rig D, A, and C, which are all not answering. Van Luttens sends him to find Harris, and they realize they can do nothing. Technicians nearly fall asleep, but when the heartbeat starts, they all wake up. Victoria finds Jamie asleep, who claims he was just resting his eyes. Victoria's nervous on what will happen, but Jamie says the doctor will work it out. She's scared of what happens when you touch the weed, and what happens whenever they land somewhere. The doctor comes in unsure what's happening and says that they have to wait. Victoria's fed up with all the awful things that happen to them when they go anywhere, and she wishes they can just go somewhere nice for a change. Harris finds Robson outside and asks where his wife is. He says that she'll be found very soon, and he walks into the sea. Van Luttens is ready to go down into the pipes to see the problems as the doctor advises against it. He says he can't wait and he needs to check the shaft as he is lowered down. He shines a light around the shaft. He sees the foam and weed, which grabs him and pulls him down under the water, screaming. They can't get him up, so the doctor and Jamie decide to follow. Harris goes to Price, who says that Jamie Jones is on her way there. Oak and Quill tell Harris that it's too late for the doctor and Jamie. Well, the doctor and Jamie find Van Lutten's flashlight, with Jamie wanting to get out. Jamie tells a man, Perkins, that it might just be a squabble. No, Jones tells a man, Perkins, that it might be just be a squabble, so they decide to see the problems firsthand. Harris is told of Jones's arrival. He tells Oak to bring the doctor and Jamie up at the first sign of trouble as he goes to meet Miss Jones. Oak and Quill assure Victoria that they will take care of everything. Jones doesn't believe Harris's story of seaweed creatures. She thinks that he's been using things. He's just been seeing things, and they need to send someone to see what's going on out on the rigs. He calls for helicopters as Jones wants to speak with Robson. Harris says he isn't well. The doctor and Jamie watch as the foam starts bubbling and the weed starts to come up as they try to get out. Price starts calling Rig B, and they call up for the lift, which doesn't come. Oak and Quill leave the impeller room, with the doctor and Jamie climbing up the ladder on the side of the shaft and make it up top all right. They get back into base and find the room empty, including Victoria, who wouldn't leave. The helicopter reports of foam and weed covering the rigs, and Harris says they must blow them up. Jones and Perkins question this, and Robson bursts in and screams that they're all his and he won't allow it. Jones questions who won't, and Robson replies he doesn't know and runs away. The doctor comes in and contradicts Harris that Robson is just stressed. He says Robson is being controlled by the weed. Jamie looks for Victoria, as Jones doesn't believe anything about this weed creature. The doctor explains that the weed is a parasite, and when they get a call from Baxter at the main rig, who's overrun with the weed. We watch as the weed overtakes him. Price calls again, but the connection has been lost. Jamie searches for Victoria and finds her passed out on some of the steps. He tries waking her, but thinking she might be dead. She wakes up and Jamie's mad that she tricked him into professing his feelings for her. She explains something happened with Oak and Quill, and she's fed up with all these crises. They hear the heartbeat and find the weed in the cylinders. The doctor realizes that the weed is trying to use the rigs as a colony, and he's pulled away to the pipe. They all see the weed as the invasion begins, with the weed breaking through the pipeline room. This leads into episode 5, where the doctor edges toward the weed. Price can't reach any of the rigs, and the doctor says that they're all dead, and they can't blow them up, because the weed will spread across the world, and even the weed is controlling the higher-ups first. They realize that they must find Robson, and Harris questions why Victoria would be attacked in the oxygen room. They realize that pure oxygen must be toxic to the weed, and they decide to trust the doctor. Oak and Quill go to the oxygen store with gas masks on and go inside. Price tells Harris that Robson is being guarded in his room, and Jones demands to see him, and Harris agrees that if he and Perkins goes with her. Perkins wants to blow up the rigs as they get to Robson's door. Jones goes in and tries waking him up. She tells him that it's all right, and he says that she can't help. He refuses to say what happens, and no one can help or fight it. He sits up, and she tells him that she can send him back to the rigs. He asks for her help as he freaks out. Harris and Perkins burst in as he goes into a trance. They leave and decide that they must destroy the weed. Victoria wishes to get back to the TARDIS, and Jamie says that they'll leave once the doctor finds the obvious way to fight the weed. Jones asks the doctor, who doesn't know how to stop it before it attacks the room that they're in. Robson gets out of his bed and looks at his vent. He mutters, "Yes, yes, yes," and goes and attacks a guard outside when we see his hands are covered in the weed. Harris realizes that the oxygen store is missing, and the doctor says that they must find out who's the traitor among them. Jamie attacks Oak and Quill by punching them, who try to get away, and they gas through him as Victoria screams and they run away. Jamie thinks it was the punch that got them to go away, which the doctor says it couldn't have been because he doesn't punch that hard. The weed in the pipeline room is pulsating more and more, and Jones says that they have the doctor as hope. The weed then expands like it did in the TARDIS labs when they put it in the tank. The pipes break and it starts flooding in the room, and they find Victoria missing. Everyone tries to get out as the doctor holds the weed in and Jamie blocks them. They go off to look for Victoria. Robson gets out into a car with Victoria as hostage and drives away. He drives to a cliff where he drags Victoria into a helicopter and takes off into the air. Harris notices the helicopter, and the doctor calls to him and tells him to come back and bring Victoria with her, safe. Robson says that Victoria will not be harmed if the doctor comes over to us. The doctor says he will save his life. Jones save her life. Jones is against it, but Harris makes her agree so that he can get to the center of this and he gets them to the helicopter. The doctor and Jamie get into the helicopter and go in pursuit of Robson, who's heading towards the rigs. They find Robson who's on the control rigs, which the doctor then follows. Harris says he will evacuate in an hour if nothing is done within an hour. The doctor and Jamie find the nerve center and go in to land next to Robson's helicopter. They climb down into the foam as the helicopter flies away, circling. They go inside through a hatch where they go along the hallway and down some stairs. They notice that it's very quiet and they make themselves known. They hear Victoria scream as the heartbeat starts. They decide to be cautious and find a foam-filled room with Robson being full of foam and weed, saying to come in, "We've been waiting for you." This leads into episode 6, where the doctor is told that the new masters need him, and Jamie goes to find Victoria. Robson says that the masters will conform all minds, and he releases gases. They rush out, and Victoria screams, repelling Robson, so she keeps screaming as they get to the helicopter. They can't call down the helicopter and close the hatch and decide to get Robson's, which the doctor has been dying to try controlling since the enemy of the world. He flies it up out of the foam and away from the rigs. The doctor has difficulty controlling the helicopter, and they loop-to-loop and fly under the rigs with difficulty, and are radioed instructions on how to fly it back to control. Harris wants to evacuate, and Jones puts the base on red alert with oxygen being sent in without evacuation. When the doctor bursts in to explain that they have a weapon, the doctor explains that they found the cure. Quill has nearly recovered, and they suggest using a lot of noise at the center through the pipes, which is the only way, and it'll probably take only about a half an hour. The doctor says that they must boost the communications equipment and loop Victoria's scream to destroy the weed. The impeller shaft room is given way as the weed bursts through. Victoria can't scream until she sees the oncoming foam and weed into their room, which risks its way into the control center. Harris tries to evacuate before anything, and the doctor has the scream played through a device of the doctors and the speakers. The weed surrounds them as it comes up the hallway. He hands out weapons, and they use as it breaks in and is forced to retreat from the guns that the doctor gave everyone. After the doctor screws with the controls, and then after the weed's been destroyed, they switch off. They have to see if they destroyed the center of the weed, and Jones thanks the doctor. Victoria breaks down and says she can't take more of this. They talk to Robson and Maggie, who say everyone is all right and nobody died. The doctor, Robson, and Victoria, Jamie, and the Harrises all make up over dinner, and afterwards the doctor says they must be going. Robson invites them back any time, and Victoria says she doesn't know if she wants to go with the doctor or stay. The doctor says if she wants to, she can stay, and the Harrises say that they can definitely have her. The doctor says that they'll stay for a day just so she can think it over. Everything runs smoothly on the rig after the repairs, but Robson says when relief arrives, they should all get some rest. Victoria and Jamie talk it over as the doctor goes for a swim. Jamie asks if she'll be happy there, and she says that she would, and asks for them not to leave without saying goodbye. And then they wish each other good night. The next morning, the doctor and Jamie row out to the TARDIS, with Victoria and the Harrises waving in the distance. Inside, Jamie says they can't leave, and the doctor says not to worry about her, and so he takes off. Final thoughts? Forget the Deep is probably my favorite story under the Base Under Siege structure because of simply how well the story works. Although only a minute and 15 seconds of footage exists, plus about 3 minutes and 32 seconds of alternate angle footage, the audio of the story is able to carry it all the way through, giving the story a very claustrophobic feel, and as an unnoticed menace terrorizes and controls our cast. The surviving clips are terrifying, and the reconstruction isn't half bad in its own right. Deborah Walton gives her best performance as the terrified Victoria Waterfield, who is sick of all the death that follows her and follows the doctor, and has to deal with the dilemma of if she wants to leave the doctor and Jamie and where to go because her family died when she was introduced. Her departure is one of the saddest, and actually made me sad, unlike Rose's, which was supposed to be a tearjerker, but didn't get me nearly as sad as Victoria's did. What really helps is that they took the time to develop her departure, starting in about episode 3, which made it more emotional, because we heard her question her decision to leave. Where the previous creepy story had a lot of characters that were unimportant and died, this story is even more frightening, and yet no one died, along with us being able to understand all the characters. Victor Pemberton knows how to write characters, especially Robson, who goes insane before being taken over by the weed. All the cast gives great performances, making this the perfect story. All in all, I give Doctor Who, Fury from the Deep, a 100% for being a perfectly terrifying story that everyone should see. If I could get one episode back from the story, it would have to be either episode 3 or 6 because they're the most interesting, especially episode 3's cliffhanger. If you like stories like The Chimes of Midnight and Jubilee, you need to give this one a listen because it's very much like a Robert Shearman story. So get the CD released in 2004 with linking narration from Fraser Hines, as well as the Lost in Time box set released in 2004 in Regions 1 and 2 and 2009 and Region 4 for one of the scariest clips of Doctor Who history that survives from this story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time when we introduce the Second Doctor's final companion in The Wheel in Space.